and welcome to 18 Group's webinar on multi-cloud environments, how to maximize data while keeping on the right side of privacy and security. My name is Sarah Underwood. I'm an editor here at 18 Group, and I'll be moderating the webinar. Our expert speakers today are Kaushik GD, Head of ESG Cloud Solutions at NatWest, Prathipa Parapakaran, Vice President, Enterprise Data, Analytics Architecture and Strategy at Voya Financial, Rinesh Patel, Global Head of Financial Services at Snowflake, and Paul Hewitt, Director and Practice Lead for AI, Machine Learning and Big Data at Luxoft. I'll ask them to introduce themselves just a couple of moments, but first, so that you can make the best use of the webinar, you'll see a Slido panel to the right of your video. There are polls and questions. We'll be running 3 polls today, so do please take part so that we can get some idea of where you are with multi-cloud. And in the questions panel, please feel free to write any questions you would like for our speakers, and we'll get to them before the end of the webinar so that we can answer as many as we can. So just put them there when you're ready and we'll take them up later. So thank you for that. And enough of me. Let me ask our speakers to introduce themselves. Kaushik, coming to you first.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm Kaushik. I'm a head of ESG data architecture and solutions at NatWest. I'm responsible for all the cloud-based solution for every ESG initiative that NatWest is running. And as a part of that, multi-cloud has become bread and butter while we interact with not just internal to the organization, but the whole ecosystem industry as a whole.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And Prathipa, over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are. So I'm Prathipa Parapakaran. I head up the Enterprise Data Solution Architecture and the Strategy function here at Voya Financial. I've been in this role for the last 2.5 years, have spent the last 1,000+ years in the data and analytics arena, and have done a couple of successful implementations migrating to the cloud. My role here at Voya is primarily kind of tasked with, as I joined the company, trying to start a cloud journey, wherein multi-cloud is an inevitable state for any organization at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And Rinesh.
So Rinesh Patel, I look after financial services globally here at Snowflake, and my role is to define and develop the financial services proposition here at Snowflake, really delivering that proposition to our field and also to our customers as they transform in cloud.
Thank you very much indeed. And Paul.
Hi, my name is Paul Hewitt. I look after Luxoft's data and analytics practice, and we help clients move along the data journey all the way from data storage management and value maximization through visualization and often to analytics as an endpoint. As part of that journey, multi-cloud is almost always part of the strategy. So looking forward to the chat.
Okay, thank you all very much indeed. And let's get started with an audience poll. And the question is, to what extent is your organization working in a multi-cloud environment? And while you select your answer, and please go ahead and do that, while I come to Rinesh to talk about what's going on, about the extent to which financial institutions are using multi-cloud environments. Just set the scene, if you would, Rinesh.
Yeah, sure. I think what we're seeing in financial services is very much an evolution in the cloud journey. And we're seeing multi-cloud very much become essential as you see requirements evolve from generic tech to solving business problems and to regulatory considerations. It's really that tech requirements, those regulatory requirements, those commercial requirements, which is really driving adoption. And if we think about tech requirements, I think those are pretty much well understood. I think organizations are solving for scale, resiliency, enhanced security, scale, very much about scaling limitlessly outwards and upwards on demand without any resource contention, ensuring performance. I think from a resiliency perspective, should I say, a DR perspective, it's really about distributing those workloads across multiple clouds to really enhance the resiliency of architecture, to minimize system failures and outages, and to be able to shift from different cloud providers. And compliance, again, very much about leveraging those different cloud provider framework security measures, compliance frameworks, and mitigating against that single point of failure and strengthening the overall security posture. So I think technically, I think it's very much been a well understood picture. But I think now what you're seeing is the second area, regulatory considerations, come up more and more. We're seeing more and more regulatory oversight emerge, and Paul was mentioning this a few moments ago. We're seeing more and more of those requirements emerge. We're seeing firms and regulators alike really seeking more flexibility, and we're seeing firms really want to access best-in-class services from different cloud providers, and importantly have that exit strategy in mind. We're also seeing data sovereignty requirements emerge regarding storage, regarding processing. In the EU, we have DORA specifically looking into this. We're seeing firms therefore actively adopt multi-cloud in response, distributing data and workloads across geographical regions, ensuring that compliance with local data protection, minimizing the risk of data loss through unauthorized access. That's the second reason. I think the third one, which is very much also moving at pace, is the commercial reasons. Firms want to innovate at pace, and we're seeing multi-cloud provide organizations a broader access to cloud-native services and emerging technologies like large language models, like AI, like machine learning, to really enhance that customer experience. And importantly, we're also seeing this industry seek to further monetize data. More buy sides, more sell sides, more intermediaries are looking to build, deploy, and commercialize a new generation of data services, create new revenue streams for previously hard to monetize, high valuable data and business logic. So be it quant models, be it ESG models, be it data models as a service. And here, multi-cloud distribution strategies, business strategies, in fact, is important when you consider that customers aren't in a single cloud or cloud region. So removing that friction is essential from a commercial perspective. So it's very much, for those reasons, tech, regulatory-led and commercial, very much the drivers as to why we're seeing multi-cloud becoming very much de facto in financial services.
Okay, thank you. And Kaushik, as a practitioner, what would you say there? What's your experience, perhaps yourself and amongst colleagues? Are they right there? Are they building multi-cloud?
I think before multi-cloud, you have to take a step back, how the evolution happened. See, post-financial crisis, there was a large move towards cloud adoption because cost saving was the motto. And cost saving at that time was mostly about reducing cost of storage, reducing or making it scalable, and all of those other good things. And those still remain the driver, but less so. I think what is happening now, and what I've seen in my experience of the last 15 years in the data industry and financial industry, is the recent move with ESG, and I'm from an ESG perspective, being a big driver. And why is that? So let's take NatWest from a lens perspective, and then I would expedite how we have experience across the industry. In NatWest, being an old bank, we have got silos built up. We have got all sorts of cloud. We have got Snowflake, AWS, Cloudera, GCP, you name it, we have it. And now the multi-cloud angle comes from a fact that, do we have a clear strategy of not just having different cloud estate, how we can cohesively join it together and drive insights and outcomes for a variety of use cases. It could be analytics use case, it could be operational use case, both of them joined up together. Otherwise, you'll be talking in silos. ESG made it real because greenwashing is a classic case where knowingly or unknowingly, different silos might be speaking differently. So there's a need to join up. Now, it is just the internal to the bank, but think of the industry. And we have had to join up with all the major data providers, 120 plus sources, and continuously growing. And when you think of the old ways of on-prem system or different cloud estate, joining it up was difficult. We have had cases where we had got a rider driving over to our London office with a disk delivering data. It doesn't work, especially if you want to move faster. So ability to talk across cloud, across organization basically means the competitive edge. And that's why over the course of last 2-3 years, we have seen providers who are very much embedded into the old ways shifting, moving to the new ways of working, where we are able to read data from the contract to use has reduced from months to days and even hours now. And that's a big deal. So the adoption is happening, driven mostly by use case and reg than just the saving part. I think capability is the driver.
Yeah, I think
thank you very much indeed.
I just echo that. I think exactly what Kaushik just mentioned. I think what you're seeing is multi-cloud being that strategic intent. I think that's where it wasn't before. I think it's very much evolving towards that strategy, breaking down size of the cloud, enabling customers to connect their internal technology strategy with a business strategy, ESG being an example, meeting those customers in the cloud that they're in as part of their commercial strategy, moving from a state of multiple cloud investments to a true multi-cloud strategy. Those, I think, are all the considerations that I think are going into this strategic pivot towards multi-cloud. It's very much strategic, I think, is the message.
Okay, let's see those poll results, if we may. And Ranesh, you may want to just comment on these, see how everybody's doing. It's pretty good. Well, it's split. What would you say? As you might expect.
I think this is accurate. I think you've got 62% very much leaning towards a multi-cloud strategy or multi-cloud thinking, which is positive. I think this is a far cry away where it would have been a couple of years ago. So that's testament to the conversation we just had. And I think you'll see more of this specifically from sell-side banks. I think you'll see more of this specifically from intermediaries, specifically from vendors. Anyone that's looking to distribute data as a product, anyone that's looking to deliver data as a service internally, I think leans towards more of a multi-cloud environment for the reasons that we just mentioned.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you for voting. And let me bring in Pratibha. What do you see as the essential elements of multi-cloud, and what does an ideal setup look like? You may not be there yet, but what would be just great?
As Kaushik and Ranesh pretty much alluded to, I think more or less.
Pratibha, can I just ask you to speak up a little bit? You're quite quiet.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Yeah. So as Ranesh and Kaushik were saying, I think multi-cloud is as a strategy is becoming inevitable, right? Either organizations deliberately plan out a multi-cloud strategy and have better success at executing on them, or organizations unintentionally end up in a multi-cloud environment, right? Mostly it starts with avoiding vendor lock-in, M&A activities, acquisitions that kind of bring other cloud providers, poorly planned cloud approaches, or desire for, I think, what was at least 2-3 years ago, the portability conversation, right? In order to de-risk and avoid vendor lock-in. However, for kind of what we are seeing, even in the case of Voya, is that multi-cloud is inevitable for us, though we have a primary public cloud provider at this point. Multi-cloud is there, and we need to plan for it. So an ideal setup is a well-planned approach that includes the architecture principles, the strategy, as well as baking in some of the management aspects around the governance, security, people, and process that Ranesh and team alluded to as well.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And Paul, how would you describe the perfect setup, and what are the essential elements? Obviously, every firm is slightly different, but what should people be looking at, and what could they hope for?
Okay, well, I guess the first one, maybe just to state the obvious, is that you should have multiple clouds in your multi-cloud sort of approach, and one of the reasons that I say that also is just to highlight that the regulators are starting to focus on it somewhat as well. So it looks like I think at least the US Department of Treasury and possibly some of the other regulators as well are going to start asking people to explicitly report on which clouds they're using and in what way. And the reason that they want to do that is that they are concerned about the concentration of risk that is inherent in people using such a very small and very limited number of providers. So I think there's some very real sort of large-scale fundamental risk elements that the regulators are looking at, and that will inevitably flow through to everybody else as well. So that basically means that one way or the other, whatever strategy people have for moving into the cloud, the most essential element is that you should have multiple clouds, and especially for critical workloads that are going into the cloud. So that's the first thing. The second, I would say, is just to be really clear on which part of the multi-cloud migration it is that you want to look at. So, for example, do you want to apply the same workload to all the different clouds, which is, technically difficult and hard to do if you're doing it from more or less from first principles. If on the other hand you're using the likes of Snowflake or something like that, then it's easier, but it happens on a more automated sort of basis. But you need to be clear on whether or not you are rehosting, to use Gartner's definitions, rehosting, refactoring, rebuilding, or re-architecting, because whichever choice you make there then defines the rest of the architecture. So being clear on what it is that you're looking to do, and whether or not you're looking to use the same, one set of data in one cloud, another set of data in a different cloud, all the same data across all the clouds makes quite a big difference to what the architecture looks like. And then underneath all of that is the same principles. So, for example, cost optimization. Different clouds have got different cost structures. You want to be able to optimize your cloud footprint, or cost optimize your cloud footprint. Automation and DevOps is always increasingly important, and obviously security is critical. And there's quite a lot of discussion about whether it's better to have centralized platforms. In many cases, it is for managing your overall cloud footprint. And I think everyone's discussed already avoiding vendor lock-in, making sure that as far as possible, you avoid what some people have called, the Hotel California situation. You can check out, but you can never leave. You don't want to be in that situation with one or other of your cloud providers. So those for me would be the essential elements. Just making sure that you do in fact have multiple clouds, that your strategy is clear, because that defines the rest of your architecture, and then making sure you've got the frameworks in place to optimize the costs, do the automation you need to, and do the management that you need to.
Okay, that's great. And staying with you, Paul, you've mentioned regulation. Obviously, that is one use case for multi-cloud. What else do you see being done, particularly in capital markets, with these kinds of stacks?
Well, I guess so. On the regulatory side, the regulators are going to take an increasing amount of interest, and obviously they already do in certain senses, with things like GDPR and so on. It's really important to make sure that the security is there, and there's we have entire divisions of people that focus on nothing else but security across all the different cloud environments. So the security angle is always important, but looking at the use cases, that also comes back to the strategy. So a lot of the financial institutions or at least people that we talk to, there's quite a segregation between the type of data that you put onto the cloud, and that relates again back to the privacy angle. So the first thing that people usually put on the cloud is workloads where the data is not that mission critical. So, or that the penalties are not that great if there's a problem with it. So, PII data, anyone that puts PII data on the cloud normally has to go through a lot of compliance hoops. So that normally is one normally does only with a fair amount of care and caution. Things that often go on first, in terms of capital markets use cases, are anything that involves large-scale analytics. I mean, that's pretty good usually. So your data lakes often go on there first of all. Anything that requires experimentation and innovation. The cloud you can scale out really easily and really quickly, so that often goes on quite early. And anything where the data is really, really big, and it starts getting towards cloud scale, and it's leveraging the unique things that the cloud has, that also gets large. And another driver that we see quite often, they kind of related, the two things going in different directions, is a lot of vendors these days, a lot of data vendors, for example, are becoming cloud native. So if you want to use them optimally, it's best to be on the cloud yourself. And similarly, for certain types of FIs, there's a big interest in monetizing their own data on an external sort of a way. So you want situations in certain circumstances to third parties, whether it's your clients or whether it's your people that you work with, you need to make that data available. And those two things are increasingly are shifting into the cloud. So overall, I'd say, initially internal applications with low sensitive data, anything like that goes in. Market data, analytics, those sorts of things go in. Anything involving monetization and data interchange, that goes in. And lastly, I guess the other thing also increasingly, just because it's easy to scale up, is reg and compliance testing. So if you want to do large scale testing, easy to do it on the cloud, not so easy to do it elsewhere. So anyway, there are many, many use cases, but maybe I'll stop there. Those are some of the bigger ones that we see.
Okay. Patrick, how do you see it out there as a practitioner? Where are the use cases?
So I think from a ESG perspective and across the industry, I see a major shift towards cloud. Just reflecting on something Paul just mentioned, that historically, FIs have tend to stay away from any mission critical use case from cloud. But my thought process would be, what is mission critical? So far, it always has been customer interfacing is mission critical. However, as time moves, analytics driven decision making is also mission critical. So where do we draw the line? So I think I can understand that person not being able to draw money out of ATM, that is definitely something is probably going to stay out of cloud for foreseeable future. But if somebody wants to make a decision whether I'm going to underwrite to a customer because his climate score or PD or LGD values are a certain level, we are already front running the industry to ensure that those are cloud driven. Now let's come to the fact that how multi-cloud become a factor. So multi-cloud, in my perspective, across the European industry, what I'm seeing is more and more different providers have to collaborate if we have to enable our ESG use cases, because not one person has the full capability. It is impossible. The breadth of the problem is so huge. We have to collaborate, or we won't be able to deliver the goods. Especially for banks more than anyone else, because we have obligation not just to decarbonize ourselves, but to decarbonize the people we are lending. We need to ensure that our customers also can surface the data up in a timely manner. So how do we do that? We collaborate with data providers, we collaborate with consultants, we collaborate with a variety of other providers of all sorts. And each one of them has their own setup. And it is like a distributed set of mesh that we create, not just your own organization, across the organization. And we need to start thinking of multi-cloud as not isolated as an organizational problem, but a cross-organization problem. Now, another aspect which I think was touched upon was the security aspects. I think that's very important. So the security aspect, one of the things that we have been doing is adopting a file-less, API-less data movement between organizations. And that has been a massive success, because in essence, the old ways of files and APIs, which has been there for decades, has its limitations, significantly enough, especially when you're looking to do large volumes of data, terabytes of data. It cannot be handled robustly. So when we have to implement those kind of solution where we have to zoom in, zoom out of locational data, which is terabytes and terabytes of data, and collaborate with organizations with different kind of cloud setup, multi-cloud is an inevitability. So the question is not about whether we're doing or not, it is just how efficiently we're doing, and the architecture needs to consider distribution, collaboration, security, and also the speed to delivery.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And let's run another poll question here. This one asks, what are the challenges of building and operating a multi-cloud environment at your organization? You can tick as many of the boxes as are appropriate on this one, so please feel free to do that. And while you do that, let me jump back to Kaushik, if I may. How do you see the particular challenges here of building and operating a multi-cloud environment? We've touched on some of the things which are troublesome, security and things like that. What are the key things here?
I think in this case, I would focus on internal to organization. So when an organization has multiple cloud setup, the biggest challenge you're dealing with, duplication of data. So if there's duplication of data because there's a duplication of use case. So in terms of strategy on how we want to have a data architecture, which is seamless, from top down, there needs to be directive. It is not a bottom-up decision, purely because if it is a bottom-up decision, historically, there's a tendency of individual teams believing that they know the data best. But the problem with that is, if they know the data best, the group-wide outcomes, be it analytics, be it regulatory outcomes, be it group-wide, disclosure reporting, they goes awry. So I think in terms of operational setup, I would say there needs to be a driver to converge use case types. So if it's analytics use case, we need to say that, while there's sufficient federation, the different team can have different cloud setup and then can run it. But when there is a group-wide use case, you need to converge it, reduce the number of duplication of data, reduce the probability of things going wrong. And as a result, there's a reputational damage, and there could be much more financial damage also on the back of it. So I think that those are the principles we need to manage from a outgoing operational analytics reporting. I'm not going into the operation servicing one. We are exploring that angle, that even when operation systems are on-prem maybe and servicing customer real time, how can cloud support that by analytics augmentation? I think that's a more recent development. Part of it is supported by some of the things that Snowflake is doing and some of the other providers are doing. But I think we are not there yet. But the analytics one definitely is something we need to be conscious of from a data architecture perspective.
Okay, thank you. Pratibha, how would you go about doing this? And what are the challenges? And I don't ask Kaushik, but where are we in terms of getting data privacy and security right? Because obviously, as you will, those are key.
Yeah, I think most multi-cloud journeys probably started with a tactical focus, right? We want to avoid vendor lock-in. We want to de-risk, cost optimize, and it starts with sourcing or procurement primarily, looking at how we can put the cloud players, encourage competition, and derive value out of that. With that approach, what ends up happening is that be it the definition of the architecture principles, having a governance framework and a management framework around a multi-cloud approach, are reactive, right? Because procurement is already kind of well on its way to kind of adopt the multi-cloud environments, and then we are catching up in terms of architecture and the management framework. And so is also the constructs around data privacy and data security. Having a centralized security control plane across the multi-cloud environments require a lot of thought, elaboration, due diligence in order to make sure that we have that right. And that type of a setup is quite complex to establish, and kind of what we are seeing here at Voya as well. Simple things such as solving for key management, identity and access management, relatively easy to do it within one cloud. When you now start to put together a multi-cloud estate, starts to become quite complex, and you need to think about vendor agnostic solutions to be able to kind of implement those types of solutions. The other challenge that I see is generally there have been, we have to be very thoughtful about training and upskilling talent, especially when migrating to the cloud. A multi-cloud approach actually magnifies that. So we need to be even more thoughtful about how we are bringing people along with the process as well when we start to adopt the multi-cloud approach. The other significant area that I see within Voya and the financial services sector when we're looking at multi-cloud is data gravity and the challenges with respect to data integration. Where we source data, typically in a multi-cloud setup, data sources are spread across our hybrid and multi-cloud estates. Consumption apps might reside in a different estate. Data egress, ingress, the location of the data as it pertains to data sovereignty and other aspects that Ranesh and others mentioned become very critical. And some of the aspects around data lineage, capturing technical and operational metadata, which usually takes a back burner when we're looking at a single cloud solution, becomes very prominent. and a key challenge to solve for in a multi-cloud estate.
Okay, fine. Now, Rinesh, how would you sum up some of these things in terms of the challenges, particularly around getting data privacy and security right?
So yeah, I think I'd echo pretty much what we've just talked about. I think there are a set of challenges. I think we just covered them a few moments ago. Yeah, I think there are a set of challenges around security, around privacy, around entitlements. We're very much at the heart of what our customers are looking to enable and put in place. And I think there's technologies that are now emerging to provide those capabilities to really help customers meet those requirements.
Okay, that's great. Paul, let me come back to you, and can we see the poll results? Perhaps you'd like to comment on these. These are the challenges of our audience. There you go. What would you say there?
Okay, so that makes it makes a lot of sense, I think. So concerns about data privacy and security. So everybody's very much focused on that, and I think that's very much a developing and evolving sort of area. So the security side, every time that you've got a multi-cloud, your attack surface increases a whole lot. I think the earlier point about centralized security planes is a good one, and they are complex, and it is really important to get that right up front. Also becoming increasingly important is adherence to industry security standards and certifications and so forth. So it's really important to stay on top of those, both the ones that your own organization needs to have, as well as the ones that should be supplied to you by vendor organizations. So all of those things are really important, and more than that, there's a bunch of really strict regulations already in place and coming down the line about those things. So that's all really important. Data privacy as well, that also makes sense. And obviously with things like GDPR and similar bodies of legislation around the world, that's becoming increasingly important as well. And data privacy in some ways is more onerous than the data security aspect, because to keep data private, it has to be secure, first of all, so that encompasses the security. But in addition to that, the way it's used internally needs to be to adhere to the privacy regulations as well. So the privacy aspect is still pretty fast evolving. There are a large number of new protocols, but it's critical to make sure that those are built into the strategy right up front. So for example, something just as simple and innocuous sounding as being able to delete someone's data if they ask for it. It's a remarkably complex challenge if you've got to do it across multiple clouds. If your cloud has got DR and business continuity built in, you've got to make sure that you've got to have a strategy for what to do about the backups and the archives, what to do about the multiple clouds. It's not an easy process at all. So I'm encouraged to see people are focusing on those areas. I do think those are the right ones to focus on. Working with multiple cloud vendors, also, sensible. It is complex, and it's one of the things the regulators focus on as well, because they do think that the cloud vendors have got too much leverage over the FIs, comparatively speaking, because there's so few of them, so they can dictate terms more than the regulators would like. So the mode of interaction with the vendors is important. And the other common complaint among people using clouds quite frequently is that they have no visibility over operational incidents that occur on the cloud. So if there's an outage in a cloud provider, you often find out about it by accident. They're no clear, at the moment anyway, as a general statement, and there are obviously exceptions, but there are no clear processes for getting notified about cloud operational incidents, cloud breaches, and so on. So there are a couple of different angles to working with multiple cloud vendors that I think people are focusing on. And then the budget and the shortfall, those perhaps go sort of hand in glove. It is a bit of a change to get onto a multiple cloud environment, and certainly from a skills point of view, it needs a reasonably diverse team with a reasonably diverse range of skills. Anyway, so overall, it's an encouraging set of answers, I think.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Perhaps we'll be running the same survey next year. Let's wait and see. Meantime, let me come back to Rinesh, if I may. How can these problems be resolved, and what types of technologies are helpful here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think as we've discussed, I think firms are really building an enterprise data strategy in the cloud, and they've got collaboration very much in mind. How do you collaborate internally? How do they collaborate externally? We talked around that. And they're really solving for how do they remove those technology bottlenecks to data identification, to discovery, to access as more and more complex data analytics questions are asked for, but also one that crucially allows access to data in a secure and well-governed way with control and entitlements on who should and who should not be accessing data. And we see this all the time. We're seeing internally organizations are getting more and more requests from stakeholders, data scientists, quants, analysts, compliance folk, all with wide-ranging queries and data asks. And externally, retail, institutional asset owners are demanding more transparency, looking for more insights before making decisions. And so when you think about the solution or the answer, capabilities like privacy, capabilities focused on security, capabilities focused on entitlements are very much near and dear to our hearts at Snowflake. There are areas that we're investing in, there are areas that we're advocating as a consequence of the requirements that we see from customers. And from a data privacy perspective, as per the poll we just discussed it with the team, we're enabling customers to really comply with all those associated data protection laws by allowing them to really collect, process, share, archive, and delete, the data that they wish to process and delete. And from security perspective, it's really about providing organizations the necessary tools to protect their data from unwarranted, third parties that could access highly sensitive data. So capabilities like encryption or authentication, authorization are kind of very much foundational to our product. And then entitlements, really important area, telemetry and access control on who should and who can access that data, ensuring those privileges are granted at a roles-based level, at a user level, enhancing that governance is very much kind of key to what our customers are asking for and what we're investing in. But if you think about that broader requirement, I think that's where the real need is coming from. I think customers are really looking to put in place a well-governed data strategy in the cloud across multiple clouds, across multi-cloud regions, depending on their use case and the requirements, echoing what Paul and Pratibha just spoke about. So technologies like Snowflake, here we're enabling customers to take very much a domains and data mesh approach, implement those data meta stores, catalog with full lineage to enable data discovery, access, then leverage entitlements frameworks, and then utilize region to region, cloud to cloud replication to meet those regulatory and resiliency demands. So very much an unconstrained self-service experience, querying a single instance of data, and then with a single layer of data governance. I think that's kind of what the customers are asking for, and that's where the technology is moving towards.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And Kaushik, what would you say in terms of resolving some of those problems? What is your experience here?
So I think from NatWest's perspective, the way we have tackled this, and they're all real problems: privacy, security, the cross-cloud collaboration piece. And I think one thing we didn't get discussed is a cost runoff monitoring. I think there needs to be a very stringent op model in place which monitors cost runoff, because it is very easy, because there's so much compute at your for you to use is very easy to run off. So I think having those monitoring and governance in place is very important. I think what we have found, and probably just reflecting on what Rinesh mentioned, Snowflake, we have used Snowflake as our overarching umbrella, kind of unifying the different cloud verticals that we have got from different providers. There are three key things which really is helping us. Is the access control bit. That there's so usually it's a locational based access control in a traditional sense, like the cloud providers usually do that. But what we have noticed in Snowflake, they have this configurable access control at various role level, both functional level and at the governance level. So what it helps is, when you bring in customer data through its life cycle from left to right, when data is being matured, you can provide access at different level for different set of individuals. So if you want the end users only to see the aggregate level data, you can do that, whereas your admins and other people can have access to more granular level data. Then there's another aspect of it, the PII aspect that Paul mentioned. So the configurable data obscuring capability, which allows data to come in, but you can't see. You can just see the IDs, but you can't see your name, address, and other sensitive elements. And this is very important because there's another niche trend in the market, which is enabled by multi-cloud, but driven by deeper insight requirement, is hyper personalization. So if you want to have product offering to customer by joining up data, which is in different places, but giving them product offering which they want, be it retail, be it commercial, be it SMEs, any of them in between, you need to have an ability where while you tick the box for privacy, your cost and other element, you're still able to provide the service and staying on the right side of regulation. So I think we are maturing all of this at pace, and I think having organizations or cloud providers who are actively thinking for consumers such as FIs helps, because we are ultimately want to provide our service to the customer. We don't want to be bogged down by the setup. But data, if you get the data architecture and service correct, those use cases becomes easy at the end.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And coming back to you, Paul, if you would talk a little bit about how you can use, or how FIs can use multi-cloud to maximize data value.
Okay, so it's a pretty broad topic, and you can slice and dice it in a lot of different ways. But maybe I'll try to take two slightly different lenses to it. So the first is on the operating side, and I think we've already spoken, or Kaushik and the rest of the team already spoken quite a bit about different ways that you can look at to manage your costs and make sure that your costs are optimized. And in particular, also, multi-cloud environments really come into their own if you're looking at situations where you need to scale out large amounts of compute at fairly short notice. So it can be burst compute requirements at certain times, or it can be just doing things like big backtesting strategies or big simulations, which are once-off, but when you do them, they need a lot of grunt behind them. So there's a certain amount of operating costs that you can optimize with a multi-cloud type of approach. But perhaps more importantly, if we're looking at just the data itself and what are the sorts of things you can do in a multi-cloud uniquely, multi-cloud is uniquely suited to things like data integration and data aggregation. And again, Snowflake is a good example of that sort of thing. You want to be in a place where you can put all of your data together from a wide variety of different sources, aggregate it up at scale, and make sense of it, either by analytics, machine learning, and other, or by making it available to the users in an appropriate form, but in a data model that's good enough for them to use and good enough for them to create value out of. So that aggregation and integration is something that is oftentimes now beyond the capabilities of on-premise situations, and it really does need a cloud environment to look at. So overall, I'd say the drivers would be, first of all, operating costs. Can we look at the operating costs and get better operating costs and ROI? Can we provide a better data outcome, and integration, aggregation, looking at data quality and all the different data governance measures that we spoke about earlier? That's really important. So making sure the value in the data is clean, the data is good to use, the data is appropriately modeled, etc. All of those good things add a lot of value to the data, and that culminates in the analytics, insights, and where appropriate, machine learning and those sorts of things also. So I would say those are the two main areas to look at, is the cloud scale things for the integration, aggregation, the reduction in operating costs, and all of that is underpinned by the usual, we've got to have security, privacy, proper backup and DR, and so on and so forth. So, many different benefits, but those for me are some of the highlights.
Okay, that's great. I perceive, what would you say there in terms of getting a value or maximizing your data value?
Yeah, extending what Paul was just saying, right? If you look at the data and analytics capabilities placement, there are a number of capabilities, right, from data ingestion, master data management, data quality, metadata lineage, running AI ML workload, data lakehouses, warehouses. The suite of solutions and the capabilities that an organization needs to stand up to derive value out of our data is quite vast. Includes all of these capabilities. An advantage of a multi-cloud approach gives the flexibility and the versatility for us to be able to choose the best of breed solution across the multiple cloud providers for each one of these capabilities. That being said, it's a data and analytics ecosystem that comprises all of these capabilities. An organization choosing the best of breed approach by taking advantage of a solution that Snowflake best offers versus another provider, public cloud provider that offers best another set of capability, let's say around data quality. They need to be integrated really well. However, for organizations that are looking for a best of breed approach and taking advantage of the right set of solutions for these capabilities, the multi-cloud approach just gives the right set of Lego blocks for us to kind of build up each other. The other advantage is helping improve data availability, right? With multiple cloud providers, the regions in which we can kind of place the data and make it available for consumption just kind of widens up, and making that available to the consumers in various geographic regions, especially for a global organization, is a very attractive angle as well, right? And then as I mentioned, since there are a number of capabilities in a data and analytics platform or an ecosystem, by having a multi-cloud solution, we are also improving the resiliency through HA and DR aspects, tapping into kind of the advantages that each one of those multi-cloud providers can bring to the table. I would say those are some of the advantages that financial institutions can take care of while leveraging a multi-cloud approach.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move on to some audience questions because we are running quite a bit of time here. So let me put a few to you. First one for you, Rinesh. Does mitigating risk mean you need to duplicate across multiple clouds for critical workloads?
Can you ask that question again, sorry?
Yeah, sure. Does mitigating risk mean you need to duplicate across multiple clouds for critical workloads?
Does mitigating risk mean you need to duplicate across multiple clouds and across multiple workloads? I think it's a strategy. I think it's a consideration. I think customers are, as I mentioned at the top of the call, I think customers are thinking about resiliency, thinking about distributing workloads across multiple clouds as part of a wider enterprise data strategy. It's a consideration, but one that sits alongside a set of other considerations that I think we've talked about, i.e. regulatory drivers, i.e. technical drivers, i.e. commercial drivers.
Okay, that's great. And we talked about monitoring. Was that you, Paul? And this question asks, how can we monitor a multi-cloud stack and quickly identify and resolve any downtime or degradation? Yes, I think it was you, and you were saying you can't necessarily see what's happening.
There are a couple of, again, there's multiple different ways to do it. So the clouds, many of the clouds themselves have got fairly comprehensive monitoring tools and dashboards built in. And then there are ways to aggregate those metrics into your own internal dashboards, and there's a bit of development effort involved there. There are also a number of third-party vendors now supplying cloud management platforms which are cloud agnostic. So a number of those provide those sorts of analytics and metrics as well. So it partly depends on the use cases and partly depends on how complex the requirements are. So if it's a relatively simple starting point, it's not too much of a challenge to aggregate the metrics into a central platform and do a lot of the work yourself. If it's a large, complex environment with multiple workloads, it might be worthwhile considering a centralized CMP to take care of a lot of that.
Thank you. And a couple of questions for Kaushik and Pratibha. Pratibha, this one asks, what are the benefits and limits of restricting a multi-cloud environment to, say, 2 clouds?
The specific number is going to depend on what's the appetite of an organization for spreading out. So the advantage that I was alluding to was having the ability to choose, the flexibility to choose the best of breed solution when you're looking at a multi-cloud approach. So if you want kind of the versatility, I think you could be looking at 2 or even more, right? If you want to be able to kind of get the full-fledged benefits of choosing that best of breed approach. However, the downsides are kind of being able to manage such a complex environment. Integration becomes key. The cost runoff that Kaushik was talking about becomes really a consideration for an organization. So I think it's going to be a balance between the appetite of an organization taking advantage of the versatility and the flexibility that comes with the multi-cloud approach, balancing that with kind of the investments that an organization needs to make with kind of building the governance framework, the security framework, the FinOps framework, and having a solid approach from a management standpoint. So I would say essentially, I think it's I think the number is not necessarily a consideration. It's kind of balancing these 2 aspects, right? I wouldn't say that restricting to 2 kind of gives you the maximum benefit. It's going to be based on the organization's appetite for the flexibility and the versatility. This is how much they are willing to invest in building out that complex environment.
Okay, great, thank you. And one for you, Kaushik, it pretty much asks how can you fit multi-cloud privacy and security together? Essentially, where do you start? Where should people be looking first to do this?
Interesting one. So you were saying that from a multi-cloud perspective, which one we should start first?
Yeah, privacy, security.
I think it's about not being multi-cloud, it is being cloud agnostic. When you let your data to be matured to a level in different cloud setup, and then you can have a tool which can join them up seamlessly in a cloud agnostic way, I think what it ensures that at the integration point, the cloud provider can seamlessly read between multiple sources, join it up, and then the security aspect is your own team testing or even third-party testing that the breach, the boundaries are managed properly. If you can manage that when talking between multiple clouds, the boundaries are managed properly, then you can work at pace. So what we have done, for example, if you can imagine different clouds like AWS, GCP, Cloudera, and a few others stacked up side by side, and we've got Snowflake sitting on top. So only thing we had to ensure is when we are surfacing reporting and analytics use case from the top, we have got the boundary linkages tested really, really well, so that this, whether it is tri-security, whether it is penetration testing, whatever might be the individual organization's risk appetite, that is met. And if that is met, then you can be assured that your data is not lost, it is meeting various regulatory guidelines, and at the same time, you are able to be flexible and leverage on the capability of a variety of cloud providers, and your organization is delivering the goods to the customer. So I think that would be the ideal state.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you to the audience for your questions. We have more which I will share with our sponsors later, and thank you to our speakers for answering those questions. Let's just run a final poll here and see how satisfied people are going to be when they get this all right. So if we could just run the poll, and again, it's multi-answer. Tell us what sort of benefits you expect to gain from a multi-cloud environment. And Priti, would you like to talk about that? What benefits you would expect to gain from such an environment?
Yeah, I think the key thing, kind of going back to having the versatility and the flexibility, right? You're able to kind of choose the workloads that you want to put, capabilities that you want to be able to tap into by leveraging the versatility that each one of the public cloud providers bring to the table. Or for that matter, even when we start to leverage some of the SaaS type of solutions in this landscape. So I think the key focus is on assessing the organization's use case. And one thing that we didn't touch on in the previous questions were around assessing the workloads and finding the right placement, right? Especially when we're going with a multi-cloud approach, because the advantages that you can derive is going to be, it's going to hinge on the effective workload placement fitment, because not all workloads might be the right fit for any public cloud provider, which is the reason why you're going with that approach. So you have to kind of develop this framework and diligently adopt that when you're looking at what workloads to bring in and which cloud provider do you want to kind of actually deploy that workload, right? And pair that up with being able to set up a strong centralized security governance management plane starts to kind of give you the right benefits of going with a multi-cloud approach.
Okay, we're not going to comment on this one, but let's see what our audience reckons here, what they're going to gain from a multi-cloud approach. There you go. Must be doing something, right? So lots of work to do from what we've been talking about, lots of strategies to set, lots of understanding of technology, but significant business benefits. Good to see that. And let me come then to my last item today. And I'd like to ask some of our speakers to offer some advice, summing up what we've talked about and what practitioners might need to be doing next. Paul, would you like to go there first?
Well, I guess the three pieces of advice for me would be, first of all, to think about what it is that you want to move into the cloud, and in what order. So it's that sort of rehost, refactor, rebuild sequence. So what do you want to move in? What do you need to do in order to move in? And lastly, what does the overall operating model need to look like and need to change? It's not enough just to have the tech. You've got to have the processes, the governance, and the regulatory framework all into the mix as well. So my three pieces of advice would be, focus on those three things. Easy to say, harder to do, but all quite essential.
Okay, and Ranesh, what would you say there?
Yeah, so I'd say the first is really understand the customer demands, and echoing what Paul just said, as we talked about, requirements are evolving from generic tech to business problems and to reg, as we've just talked about. Don't just make it about the tech, consider those internal and external customers, the business strategy, the commercial drivers, and align the KPIs accordingly, i.e. time to market alongside scale, TCO, efficiency. I think the second is around architecture. Design the architecture which makes shifting and moving workloads easy between different environments, meet those evolving needs of tech, business, and regulation. Think about containers, think about engineering, think about workload management and performance. And the third is around data governance, right? Ensure a strong security and compliance framework for data, a single layer of data governance across the different cloud providers that you want to interoperate with based on the use cases you're striving for. So those would be three things.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranesh, and thank you to all our speakers for sharing their expertise and experience. Thank you too to Snowflake and Luxoft for sponsoring today's webinar. Before we close, just a few team group events that may be of interest to you. We have our Data Management Summit in New York coming up in September. It's bound to be packed full of expert speakers and content, and be able to meet your pals and catch up on what's going on in the industry. So do sign up and join us if you can. You can also register for next week's 18 group webinar on the evolution of enterprise data management for ESG, managing non-standard and unstructured data. And you could join our 5th of October 2023 RegTech Summit London, which again is lining up into an interesting agenda, plenty of good content and speakers. That said, that's it for today. So thank you again to Kaushik, Pratibha, Paul and Ranesh, and thank you to all of you who've taken part in the webinar. please complete our feedback form, as we're always keen to hear your views and improve our product. So